Welcome to part 16 of this tutorial on Excel VBA user forms. This part of the series is going to explain how you can play YouTube videos in your Excel VBA forms. So we're going to start by explaining how you can enable the Shockwave Flash object as an additional control and how you add that into the toolbox and then draw them on your forms. We'll explain all about the movie property and what sorts of things you can pass into that property to enable the object to play a video. We'll then focus on using YouTube URLs and how you can edit those to make those valid for the Flash object. We'll also explain how you can write code to validate a URL, so we'll make sure that the user passes in a valid YouTube video link. And then towards the end of the video we'll look at how you work with URL parameters so that you can control exactly how the video player appears. So there's quite a lot to do here. Let's get started. Okay, so for this example we're going to add a new page to our multi-page control, which lets the user link to a trailer for the film they're adding to the list. So the idea here is that on this page they can paste in the URL to a YouTube video containing the trailer. So the idea is that they'll have to find the trailer first on YouTube, and then they can simply copy and paste the URL directly into the form. They've got a few options to modify the way the video player works, so they can enable the controls or disable them, they can loop the video at the end or not, and a couple of other options as well. And then when all the options have been selected, they can click the Update URL button to generate a URL that's compatible with the video player. At that point they can choose to play the trailer inside the form as well, so it will run the video while the form's running. When they click the Add to List button, it doesn't store the video itself in the worksheet. That would be a bit over the top. All it does is stores the URL of the video in the worksheet so that that can be reused later on, maybe as a hyperlink. So if I click the Add to List button, it will add in that film to the list and generate a hyperlink for us as well. So that's the example we're going to create. We'll start by adding a new page to the multi-page control. So to do that we can right click on any of the existing tabs at the top and choose New Page, and then we can change a couple of its basic properties. So rather than having it called Page 1, we're going to call this one Trailer Page, and then we'll change its caption as well, so that says something more sensible as well. We'll call that one Trailer. I'd then like to draw a frame inside the page just to make sure that the page has the same background colour as the rest of the form. You may remember this from the multi-page video if you watch that. By default you can't change the background colour of the page control itself. So the simple thing to do here is to draw a frame in the background of the page. So I bring back my toolbox and I'm going to draw a frame. I'm actually going to start by drawing the frame inside the background of the form rather than inside the page. If I draw the frame in the background of the page, it has the same background properties and font properties of the page itself. If I draw a frame inside the form, it retains the background colour and font properties of the form. So I'm going to delete the frame that I just drew inside the page, and then I'm going to click and drag the second frame that I drew into the multi-page control. Then I'm just going to change a couple of its basic properties as well. I'm going to call this one Film Trailer Frame, and then I'm going to change its caption so that it doesn't have one at all. And then I'm just going to change its left and its top properties so that that sits up in the top left hand corner. So left will become 0 and top will become 0 as well. And then I can simply click and drag the bottom right hand corner so that it fills up the entire size of the page. And having done that, we're now ready to draw our movie player control inside the page. The problem we have at this point is that the toolbox doesn't contain, by default, any controls that allow you to play videos on a form. So what we're going to need to do is to add in a new control into the toolbox. A simple way to do this is to just right click in the background of the toolbox and then choose Additional Controls. Now we're going to be doing this quite a lot in this series from this point on. We're going to be using several different additional controls, and rather than just adding them to the default controls page, that's going to end up looking quite messy. What I thought it might be worthwhile doing first of all is just adding an extra page to the toolbox. So just like you can add a new page to your own custom multi-page controls, you can right click the controls page in the toolbox and indeed choose to add a new page. And then we can right click on that and we can choose to rename it. I'm going to just call this one, I'll just call it Extra for now. And then if you right click into the background of that page, you can keep all of your custom additional controls separate from the default controls. So now that we have our extra page in the toolbox, we can right click on its background and then choose Additional Controls. And at that point a dialog box will pop up showing us a list of all of the additional controls we can add in to the toolbox. Now this list is completely dependent on exactly which software you have installed on your machine. You'll see a combination of Microsoft tools and third-party software here as well. So for instance, I've got an Adobe PDF Reader control, which obviously only appears because I've got Adobe PDF Reader installed on this machine. So your list may look different to mine, don't worry about that. The particular item that we're looking for here to play a YouTube video on a page will be sitting right down towards the bottom of the list, past the entire Microsoft section. You're looking for something called a Shockwave Flash object. Now this will only be in the list if you have Macromedia Flash Player installed on your machine. And if you can't see this item in the list already, what you'll probably have to do at this point is head off and look for how to install Macromedia Flash Player, or Adobe Flash Player if you prefer. So once you've found that and installed it, you should be able to come back to this list in the Visual Basic Editor, and then make sure you place a cross in the box next to the Shockwave Flash object, and then when you click OK, you should find that that new item has appeared in the toolbox. Once you have the control in the toolbox, it behaves a lot like any existing control. So if you want to draw one on the form, you can just click once on the tool, and then either click on the form or click and drag to draw one. Let's make this one reasonably large. And then when you've drawn the object on the form, when it's selected, you'll see its properties in the properties window. Let's rename this one as we would any normal control, so rather than call it Shockwave Flash 1, we'll call this so that it's called Film Trailer. That's the only property we're going to change just for the moment. We'll add in a couple of extra normal controls as well, just to allow us to modify the way this Shockwave Flash object works. So clicking back into the form, going back to the original controls page, I'm going to add in a quick label, which I'm going to draw just below the movie player control, and we're going to change its name so that it's called something like Film Trailer Label. And then I'm going to change its caption so that it says something like paste YouTube URL here, or below, something like that. And then we're also going to have a normal text box as well, just below that, into which the user can paste in the original URL. So I'm going to draw a text box just below. Going to make it reasonably wide so it's got enough space to display the full URL, and we're going to call this one Film Trailer Original URL. Last little control just for now is a command button that we're going to click on to assign the movie or the URL to the Flash Player object. So again, just one more object, a command button, which I'm going to draw somewhere down here towards the bottom right hand corner, and we're going to call this one update trailer URL. And we'll just change the caption as well so that it says update trailer, something along those lines, and then we're pretty much ready to go to demonstrate the basics of how this Flash Player object works. Perhaps the most important property of the Shockwave Flash Player object is the movie property. So if you were to select the object and then look into the properties window, you'll find there's a movie property sitting in there somewhere. And you can just paste in a path to a file here. This is just a string property, so if you have the path to an SWF file, you can paste that in directly there, or you can paste in a URL directly into that property. Our form is going to work a little bit more dynamically than that though, so we're going to actually add some code to the click event of the update trailer button that's going to set the movie property when a user clicks it. But first of all, we need to find an appropriate URL that we can use to update the movie property of the object. So what we're going to do here is head off to YouTube so that we can find a URL for a movie trailer. And I've got a few loaded up here for various different films that already exist in our list. So I'm going to use, quickly for this example, I'm going to use the Deadpool trailer. The problem with the default URLs that point to a YouTube video is that they don't point just directly to the video. They point to a web page with an embedded video player control. Now we already have an embedded video player control on our form. All we want to do is reference the video, whose unique ID is represented by this sequence of numbers and letters. So we need to do a little bit of conversion here for this URL to make it available to our Flash Player object. So what we can do here is we can remove the part which says watch followed by the question mark. So the question mark is the start of the parameters. So let's get rid of the watch and the question mark. And we're also going to get rid of the equal sign there and convert that into just a / character. So having done that, if we were to just browse to that URL, if we just hit enter here, what you should see happen is that we browse to just the video itself, so not the page containing the embedded video player, but the actual video as it's stored on YouTube. So we can copy and paste that directly into our code. So I'm just going to copy this, head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and then double click on our Update Trailer button, and add a simple line of code here which says Film Trailer dot movie equals, and then inside a set of double quotes, I'm just going to paste that copied URL directly in. Just to test that this works, let's head back to the form's object view by double-clicking on it, and then click on the background of the form and run it. If we head to the trailer page now, we ought to be able to just click on the Update Trailer button, and that should directly link to the video on YouTube, and we should be able to play that within the form. So at this point, the basics are working. What we ideally want to do next is make it so that the user can paste in any original YouTube URLs. We don't want the user to have to do the modification of the URL. We want our code to do that for them. So we're going to add some code now that allows the user to paste a URL in here, and then clicking the Update Trailer button will generate the past version of it, the one that will allow the movie player to work. So let's stop running that and close the form down and head back to the Visual Basic Editor. And we're going to draw an extra text box in this frame that lets the user see the updated or the constructed URL. So let's just draw another text box just below the Update Trailer button, and then we'll make that reasonably wide, so about as wide as the frame itself. And then we're going to change its name as well, so that we call the original text box Film Trailer Original URL. We're just going to call this one Film Trailer URL. We're also going to make sure that the user can't type a value into it. So we're going to change its locked property from false to true. So we'll find its locked property there, and we can just double click on the word false to switch that to true. And just to indicate to the user that they can't or they shouldn't type something into it, we're going to change its back color property as well. So we can find the back color property, and then I'm going to change that to the standard, what's it called, button face. So the default button face color, which is that sort of pale grey. What we'll then do is double click the Update Trailer button again, and we'll go back to the code. I'm just going to comment out the film trailer movie just so we can still see the sort of thing we've got to construct just for reference. But then we'll add in all the code that will convert whatever the user pastes in into the proper URL to link to that video. It's probably also worthwhile copying a version of the original type of URL so we can see what we're trying to get from and to. So I'm going to quickly switch back to YouTube and go back one page, and then I'm going to copy and paste the original URL here as well. So I'm going to copy that, just stop running that one, head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and then paste this in as a comment, just so we've got a quick reference to the types of things we're changing from and to. Now, to keep things slightly neater and tidier, we're going to create a separate function that will calculate the trailer URL. So just below this procedure, I'm going to declare a new private function, which I'm going to call trailer URL, and it's going to accept a single parameter by default, which is going to be called original URL, and that's going to be a string. And then the function is going to return a string as well, so as string. Now, if we assume just for simplicity at this point that every time the user pastes something into this text box, it's going to be in this very specific format, the very simple thing that we have to do here to convert this original version into the appropriate version is to replace this little section here, watch $v equals, with v/. And there's a simple replace function in VBA that we can use to do that. So our function's definition is going to be quite simple. We're going to say trailer URL equals replace, and there are three parameters we're going to fill in. The expression is the entire string of text in which we're trying to replace something, so that's going to be the original URL parameter. The thing that we're trying to find in here, the specific string, is going to be watch $v equals. That's the part that we're trying to replace, and what we're trying to replace that with is again another string of text, which is going to be a v and a /. At that point, what we're going to do, just for testing purposes, again back into the click event of the Update Trailer button, we're going to say first of all film trailer URL dot text. So we're going to modify the text that's stored in this text box. We're going to make that equal to trailer URL, so this is where we're going to call on our existing function, and we're going to pass into that the text of film trailer original URL. We should also then be able to update the movie property of the film trailer object, so we're going to say film trailer dot movie equals, And then we could do one or two things here. We could just do the same thing again and call our function that we've just called, or we could just reference the text property of the text box that we've just set. It doesn't really matter too much. It's probably slightly more efficient to call or refer to the text stored in the text box than to call on this function again. This function is eventually going to become slightly larger and more complex than it is right now. So what I'm going to do is refer to the film trailer URL dot text. So at this point we ought to be able to give this one a quick test. So let's head back into the object view of the form, and we'll run that one by clicking on its background and running it. And then if we go to the trailer page, we can just switch back to YouTube briefly, and let's copy again the Deadpool URL and back to the form and paste that in. And if we click the update trailer button here, it should generate the correct URL for that trailer. We should also find that if we go back and choose a completely different trailer altogether, so let's go for the next one in the list of tabs I have here. So I'm going to go for avatar. I'm going to copy and paste that one into the form, and then if I update the trailer again, it will change this to a different trailer. So this should now work as long as this is consistent, as long as we can guarantee that the user always pastes in a URL in this specific format with the watch $v equals, and then after that just the unique ID of the video, this is going to work. The problem is, of course, that the user's not always going to paste in a nice uniform URL like this. So we have to add a little bit more code to deal with the sorts of random things the user might try to do. First of all, we should probably check that the user has pasted in a URL that relates to a YouTube video. So that's a fairly simple test to make and kind of gives us an introduction to testing how to manipulate strings and testing whether strings contain certain strings of text. So we're going to test if the value the user pasted in here contains www.youtube.com. And if it doesn't, we're going to make our function return an empty string, and then we're going to test for that in the click event of the button. So let's cancel out of the form first of all, and let's go back to the code behind the click event of the button. And we're going to add in a little bit of extra code to the function at the top to check if the value of the original URL contains the path to the youtube.com website. To do this, we're going to use an if statement, and then we're going to use the instr or inString function, which you may have encountered before. So the inString function allows you to search for one string of text inside another, and if the string of text you're searching for has been found, what the function does is returns the position of the start of that string of text within the first one. If it can't find it, it returns a 0. So what we're going to do is we're going to test if, starting at character position 1 in the string, and the string of text we're going to be looking inside is going to be the original URL, and the string of text we're going to be looking for is www.youtube.com. Now, if that isn't found, it will return 0. Otherwise, it will return the character index of the start of that phrase of text. So if I was looking for this phrase inside the original URL, and this was the original URL, the value that it would return would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So the number 9 would be the return value. So basically, as long as we can test that as long as it's greater than 0, we know that we're going to find a match. If we test for equals 0, then we know that we haven't found that string inside the URL. So if that's the case, what we're going to do is we're going to say trailer URL equals an empty string, and then exit from the function. What we can then do, we end the if statement, is head back up to the main click event of this button, and we can test if trailer URL, and we're going to reference our film trailer original URL text. If that returns an empty string, then we can do a couple of bits of validation here. So an end if statement, we could do something like change the background color of the film trailer original URL text box. So we can say film trailer original URL dot back color equals RGB pink, our traditional color for all the validation in the series, and then we could exit from the subroutine. Otherwise, we could make sure that the background color of that text box goes back to being white. So we can just copy and paste that line and then change that from RGB pink to RGB white instead. So just as a very quick, simple test, if I switch back to the design view of the form or the object view and then run the form and then type anything into here that clearly isn't a YouTube URL, if I hit the update trailer button, it won't allow me to do anything. If I went back and I did indeed copy a proper URL, let's copy a different one this time, and then head back to the form, paste it in. This should now work properly. Okay, so that's one really simple test, making sure that we pasted in a URL that's actually on youtube.com first of all. Another potential problem we might face is that this isn't the only valid type of URL that points to a specific YouTube video. If I just switch back to YouTube temporarily and scroll down the page a little bit to find the share button, if I click on that, you'll find that you can generate a shorthand URL that points to the same video. So the video's ID is exactly the same, it's just a shorthand URL. So what if the user's using these shared versions? If I just copy and paste this, I'm going to switch back to Excel and then close the form down and head back to the Visual Basic editor behind my click event, and I'm going to paste this URL in as a comment as well, just so that we can compare this. So what if the user's pasted in a URL like this? Currently, the way our function works is, well, it would prevent them from continuing. This will only work currently with a URL in this format. But what if the user wants to use the shorthand formats? What can we do about that? What it might be better to do then is, rather than try to modify the existing URL by, for instance, replacing part of it as we've done so far, we could try to construct our own URL out of various component parts. So we know that, for instance, the URL that we're going to try to generate, if I can just make this a little clearer here by removing the unnecessary parts, we know that the URL is always going to start with this string of text. The part that's unique, really, is only going to be the video's ID. And for the two types of URL that the user might paste in, or the two types we're going to test for at least, we should be able to extract the ID of the video by using some other string functions. So let's start by modifying our function so that it's going to start building up our URL out of component parts rather than try to modify the existing one. I'm going to start by declaring a constant that's going to hold the start of the URL. So I'm going to say const URL start as string equals, and then I'm just going to copy and paste this part of the stuff we pasted in earlier on, and that will form the start of every single URL that we try to generate. Then we can modify this if statement, so we're going to repurpose this one. It's still going to eliminate non-YouTube URLs, but it's going to do it in a slightly different way. I'm going to test first of all for youtube.com/watch $v equals. So we're going to test if the URL that's been passed in includes an ID number of a video. We're going to test then if that is greater than 0, so it does indeed find this string of text in the URL. And if that's the case, what we want to do isn't return an empty string. In fact, I'm going to put that in an else clause. What we're going to do instead is try to extract the ID number of the video by finding the exact position of the $v equals and then getting all the characters to the right of that section. To do this, we're going to declare another variable which is going to hold the position of the start of the video's ID. So I'm going to say here dim start of video ID, and this is going to hold a number, so I'm going to say as long, which is a long integer, and then we're going to write inside the if statement, we're going to say start of video ID equals, and we're going to use the instring function again, so I'm going to say instr, instr, and we're going to be looking for, what I'm going to look for this time is just the $v equals symbols. So we're going to start at position number 1. The position or the start parameter, by the way, is optional in the instring function. You don't need to pass in the start number. I always do just to make it explicit, but you can omit that if you wanted to. Just get straight onto string 1, which in this case will be the URL passed in through original ID. Original URL, beg pardon, and then the string we're going to be searching for in this case is going to be $v equals. So this will return at that point the position of the start of the question mark symbol. What we want to do is return the position of the character that's 1, 2, 3 characters to the right of that. So what we need to do here is say +3. We can do an incredibly similar thing just to test for the other type of URL that the user might paste in. So in fact, let's just copy and paste the first if statement, and we'll paste it in immediately below and make it part of the same block if. So let's just tag on an else to turn that into an else if clause. And then this time, rather than testing for this URL, what we're going to do is test for the /u2.be /. And as long as that returns a number that's greater than 0, we know that the URL is still valid. So it's the shorthand version of the URL. So of course we don't want to test for a question mark v equals in here. What we'll do here, I think, is test for a full stop be /. So let's test for those 4 characters. That'll give us the starting position of the full stop. So let's add 4 characters to the end of that. So it will be full stop, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 will give us the index position of the first character of the video's ID. Now that we know the starting position of the ID in each type of URL, we can return all the characters to the right of that using another function. So let's store that in another variable. Let's declare dim video ID as a string, and then after the if statement, the else clause will of course deal with anything that isn't a valid YouTube URL now. So we can say here video ID equals mid. So we're going to use the mid function to do this. So the string we're testing for this time is, again, it's the original URL. And then the starting position of the text we're trying to return is equal to the start of the video ID. The third parameter there is length. That's optional. That you can state exactly how many characters you want to return. We just want to return all the characters to the right all the way to the end of the string from that point. So we'll just omit that parameter there. We don't need to pass that one in or pass an argument to that. So we can just close the parentheses there, and that will store the video's ID. All we should have to do now is just put the 2 parts together. So we've got the URL start stored up here. So rather than replacing part of the existing URL, we're going to build our own. So we're going to say trailer URL equals URL start, using an ampersand to concatenate the video ID. So, having done all that, let's just give this one a quick test. If we switch back to the object view and then run the form, to now be able to paste the URL into the trailer. So let's just go back and find one first of all. So I'm going to go for the Forspoken's. I'm going to go for the full URL this time. So let's copy and paste that into the form first. And if we update the trailer, that will indeed work. That's good. And then if I go back to YouTube and let's find a short version, let's find a shared version of the avatar trailer, and I'm going to copy and paste this one into the form. And then if I update the trailer again, that will still work. So both types of YouTube URLs now work based on our function. One other potential thing you might want to test for is whether the user's included a parameter in the URL that they've pasted in. So an example of that might be if I go back to YouTube and go to a different trailer, and I'm already part way through this one. So if I go to the share button here, it's possible to include a parameter which states what point the video starts at. So it's got a little time code here, so t equals 4s. If I copy and paste that into my form and then update the trailer, it will try to make the video start at 4 seconds in. So if I click play, the problem with this is that it seems to break the video. If I try to add in a time code, it can't start at that position. I'm not entirely sure the technical reason why that's the case. It may work differently on your machines. I'd be interested to hear actually. But for my machine at least, it won't start when there's a time code associated with it. So if I hit the pause button and then just delete that little parameter part and then just update the trailer again, to not include the time code. If I run this one, the video does start. So I'm not sure whether that's an issue with my machine or with the player in general. Anyway, it could be important to make sure that those little time codes are stripped off. So I'm going to close the form down, and then we'll go back to the click event of the update trailer button, and we'll add in a little bit of extra code to the trailer URL function to make sure that we strip off any extra parameters. Once we've extracted the video ID, it's fairly easy to test if we've got any parameters attached to that by looking for a question mark in the string. So the question mark indicates the start of any parameters in the URL. So what we're going to do is just use techniques similar to those we've already used in the video. We're going to say if instra, and we'll start at position number 1. We'll look in the video ID this time, and we'll search for a question mark. And as long as that returns a value that's greater than 0, then we know that there's a question mark contained within. So what we can do here is strip off any characters to the right of the question mark and the question mark itself by saying something like this. So we can say video ID equals video ID, sorry, beg pardon, equals left of video ID. So the left function returns characters to the left of a string, and the characters that we want to return, or the number of characters that we want to return, is going to be equal to the again the inString function, searching from position number 1, searching inside the video ID, searching for a question mark. So it's very repetitive, this section, and then once we've done all that, -1 and then close the parentheses. So we want to return all the characters to the left of the video ID from the position of the question mark character -1, so we don't want to include the question mark character. So having done all of that, what we should now be able to do is go back to Excel again and show the form on screen and view the trailer page, and let's just make sure I've copied a trailer with a timecode in it first of all. A URL with a timecode in it, and we can paste that into the text box, click update trailer, and we'll find that it's stripped off the little timecode and updates the video correctly, and it will indeed play correctly as well. The last little piece of code that we wrote removed any parameters that the user had pasted into the URL, but there are some parameters that you might find useful to add in yourself, and this is the page you want to go to for a quick reference as to what's available. So there's a table here on this web page that describes what parameters you can add to your URLs to modify the way the video player works. There's a whole set of these. We're going to be adding a few in. We're going to be sticking to the ones that allow the value to be set to either 1 or 0. The reason for doing that is because we're going to be adding a bunch of checkboxes, and the way I'd like my code to work is to loop over all the checkboxes, and any that are checked are going to set the value of the parameter to 1, any that are unchecked are going to set the value of the parameter to 0. So it's just simplest to use these types of parameters for our example. It's worth mentioning that there are a few parameters that don't just accept numbers. There are some parameters like colour, for instance, that you can set to explicitly red or white, and that'll change the colour of the play bar as the video progresses. And there are a few other ones as well. As I say, we're going to be sticking to the ones with 1 and 0 as their available values. So there is one in here, just while I'm here as well, just to quickly mention one in here that allows you to set the start time of your video. So there's a parameter down here called start. So rather than the default one that you can copy from the YouTube URL, so if I go back to the Deadpool one, that adds in a parameter called T, which isn't listed here in the documentation. So you could always use the start parameter if you did want to set a specific start time for a video. We're not going to use that one in this particular example. As I say, we're going to be sticking with the 1s and the 0s. So let's head back to Excel first of all, making sure you've got the form closed down, back to the Visual Basic Editor, and we'll start by drawing a bunch of checkboxes for the things we want the user to be allowed to change. Okay, so we're going to start by drawing 6 separate checkboxes. So I'm going to double-click the checkbox tool on the toolbox and just draw 6 as neatly as I can. I'll probably rearrange these shortly. And then once I've drawn those, I'm going to go back to the Select Objects cursor. And then I won't spend too much time doing this. It's going to get very boring otherwise. And you know all about from previous videos, all about the tools you've got available to lay out controls neatly. That will probably do just for the time being. Then what we'll do is rename these so that they have more sensible names and labels. So let's change the first one up here. This first one is going to choose whether or not the video player controls are enabled. So I'm going to change the name of this one to Video Enable Controls. I'm going to change its caption, so that's called Enable Controls. And then I'm also going to change another property, one that we haven't seen in this video series yet, a property called Tag. Pretty much every single control you can draw in a form has a tag property, and it's purely set up to allow you to add any other piece of information about a control that you might want to add. What we're going to use this one for this example, is we're going to store the name of the actual parameter, or the parameter's actual name. So this parameter here is called controls, and that's what I'm going to store in the tag property of my checkbox. I'm going to reference the tag property later on in code, so we can guarantee that the tag property will hold the actual name of the parameter we're trying to set. I'm also going to change the default value of this one so that it's true, so the value property can go from false to true, and let's see if we can just quickly fill in the remaining ones. So the next checkbox is going to determine whether the controls will hide themselves automatically when the video plays. So let's change its value to true. Its tag will be called auto hide, that's the name of the parameter, and then the caption will be something simple like auto hide controls. And then the name of it is going to be Video Auto Hide. Okay, next one, checkbox 3. This one's going to determine whether we can allow the full screen button. So we can say video allow full screen. And then the caption will be something like allow full screen. I'll try to do this as quickly as I can. The tag is simply fs, and that's the name of the parameter. And then the value of that I'll also set to true. Okay, just a few more to go. The next one, checkbox 4. This one's going to determine whether the video will autoplay, so I'm going to leave the value of that one to false. The parameter name is called autoplay, so let's add that to the tag, autoplay. And then we can change the caption, so that just says autoplay, and the name will be video autoplay. 2 to go. Next one will be whether we can use keyboard controls. So I'm going to say, I'm going to change it now so it says video disable keyboard. And the caption will be disable keyboard. I'll just call it disable keys just for short. And the tag will be enable KB. Sorry, beg pardon, disable KB. I'm going to set its value to true as well. Okay, last one. This one's going to determine whether we will loop the video around. So I'll leave its value set to false. The parameter name is called loop, and then the caption will be something nice and simple like loop video, and then the name will be video loop. Okay, so those are all the checkboxes set up. All we have to do now is add some code to the function to add in these parameters values to the final URL. The code we're going to add is going to loop over all of the controls in the film trailer frame and check if the control type is a checkbox, and if it is, it's going to start building a string that we can attach to the end of the URL. It's going to use the value of the checkbox to determine whether the parameter is set to 1 or 0. So let's double click the update trailer button, and we'll scroll back down into our trailer URL function. We'll need a couple of extra variables. So first of all, let's say dim ctl as msforms.control. We'll need that to loop over the controls collection, and we'll also have a string variable that holds the list of params. So let's say param list as a string. Then scrolling down towards the bottom of the function, just before we set the final trailer URL, what we'll do first is say param list equals a question mark. So we know that the parameter list always has to begin with a question mark, so we might as well set that up to begin with. And then we can write the loop that loops over all the controls. So we can say for each CTL in film trailer frame dot controls. We've done this several times throughout this series, so you should hopefully be reasonably at home with looping over controls at this point. We'll add in the next CTL, and then we can have an if statement that says if type of CTL is msforms.checkbox, then, and then say end if. And then inside here, what we're going to do is set the param list to be equal to itself. So param list equals param list. And I want to add in the tag of the control we're looking at, so ctl.tag. That's the property that contains the actual name of the parameter. And then we want to tag on or concatenate the equal sign, so we're saying what value it's equal to. And then we need to test what the value of the checkbox is. Well, in fact, rather than checking what the value of the checkbox is, we could just say ctl.value. Now what that would do is return the words true or false. A checkbox holds a Boolean value, and when you read the value directly into a string, it converts the underlying values into the actual literal strings, true or false, which isn't quite what we want. What we want is a numeric value, either 0 or 1. So one potential way to do that is to use the cint function, so convert to an integer, and that will convert them into whole numbers. Slightly unfortunately, what that will do is convert false to 0, which is fine, but it converts trues to -1, which isn't what we want. The simplest thing to do here is wrap the abs function, the absolute function, around the result of that. So that returns the absolute value of a number, so it's the number without its sign, so -1 will become 1, which is exactly what we want. Finally, we just need to concatenate a semicolon character to the end to make sure that the next parameter is separated by a semicolon. The very last step then is to concatenate the entire parameter list to the end of the URL, and that should do the job. Okay, so we should just be able to give this one a quick test now. If I go back to the form and click its background, run the form, head back to the trailer page, and then just paste in the URL. I've already got one copied to the clipboard here. So if I click the Update Trailer button, I should find that I get a little parameter list added to the end of my video's ID. So I've got control set to 1 because I've got that box checked, auto hide is 1, if I just click into the text box here, I've got auto play set to 0 and loop set to 0 because those boxes are unchecked. So what some of these controls do, you may well know this already just from watching YouTube videos I suppose, but if I run the video I've got the controls enabled, so I'll see the little control section down at the bottom here. I've got auto hide controls enabled as well, so if I move the cursor away from the video, the controls disappear, move the cursor back over it, the controls pop up. If I just uncheck that box and update the trailer again, I'll find this time that the controls remain visible all the time, so if I move the cursor away they remain visible all the time. Autoplay, if I check that box and then choose Update Trailer, that will start the video automatically as soon as the video runs, so as soon as the form updates. So I can uncheck that and update the trailer again, then I have to choose when to start it. The keyboards, that gives me keyboard shortcuts to allow me to control when the video runs. So if I just choose to enable the keys and update the trailer, then when the video has the focus, so if I've clicked into it, and then I can use the spacebar to pause it and play it again, and I can use the cursor keys, the left and right cursor keys, to jump forwards and backwards into the video several seconds at a time. What else can I do? I can also disable the controls altogether. So I'm not going to do that in this example because if I disable the controls altogether, then this little box disappears completely, and it also, for some bizarre reason, unmutes the video and turns the volume to full. So if I do this, you won't be able to hear me talking over the Deadpool trailer. Actually, maybe that's preferable at this point. Maybe you're bored of me talking all the way through this video. Who knows? But I'm not going to do that for this example. And the full screen button, by the way, is completely irrelevant. You can't make the video full screen anyway. It doesn't actually matter. With an embedded Shockwave Flash Player, you can't make it go full screen, so that was kind of an irrelevant option. You might want to permanently disable that, as it's fairly pointless being able to click on it anyway. So that's just a few of the basic properties, but a few of the basic parameters you can set up for your YouTube videos. So there are maybe just a couple of finishing touches we can add to this system just to wrap up the video. First of all, if we can disable the controls, it seems pointless to allow the users to select whether the controls are hidden or we allow the full screen control. Those are redundant if we can remove the controls altogether. So what we'll do is we'll make it so that when we change the option in this checkbox, these values or these checkboxes are enabled and disabled appropriately. So I'm going to cancel out of the form and then double click the Enable Controls checkbox. That will give me the click event. I actually want to have the change event just to make sure that if the value of that checkbox changes via code, then it will also trigger the code in here. The click event will only be if I manually click on it with the mouse. So let's or select it with the keyboard. So let's here say if the value of this changes to be equal to true, then I want to enable the other two checkboxes. If I set this to be equal to false, then I want to disable them. Now the enabled property is a Boolean property, so it can be set to be either true or false. So the simplest thing to do here is to say video allow full screen dot value, sorry, beg pardon, dot enabled is equal to video enable controls dot value, and then video auto hide dot enabled is also equal to video enable controls dot value. So when the value of the enable controls checkbox is true, these controls will be enabled. When it's false, they'll be disabled. Simple. Let's head back to the form, run it, give it a quick test. If I uncheck the box, these become disabled. If I check the box, they become enabled again. So nice simple little system to enable and disable checkboxes based on the value of another one. The final thing that we want to do here as well is make sure that when we click the Add to List button, the URL that we've generated gets added into column L of the worksheet. So I've added an extra column here called Trailer. These first 5 I've actually added in manually just because these films were already in the list. But for any subsequent films we add in, we want the URL to be generated automatically and added to column L. We also want to create the hyperlink for that value as well, for that cell, so that actually clicking on the link will take us to the video so that we can actually watch it. So let's head back to the Visual Basic editor, and we're going to add some code to the click event of the Add to List button, and specifically we're going to add some code to the Add Data to List procedure. So we can right click on that and choose Definition, so we can be taken to that. And then down towards the bottom, just below where we've added in the film picture path value in one of our earlier videos, we're going to add in another line of code that's going to say, first of all, active cell.offset 0,10 dot value equals film trailer URL dot text, or value, either would do. We also want to add in the hyperlink to that cell, so we're going to say active cell.offset 0,10 dot value, dot hyperlinks dot add. And there are two compulsory parameters to fill in here. The anchor is the object. That can be either a range object or a shape object, but here it's going to be a range, so the range is going to be the same cell. It's going to be active cell dot offset 0,10. That's it, just the object. Should have used a variable here to reference this cell. And then the address that we're going to use is going to be the text of the film trailer URL control. So film trailer URL dot text. Okay, so having done all that, we ought to be able to go back to Excel now and just give the whole system a quick, simple test from the menu sheet. So we can show the film on screen and then fill in some details. Do we really want to fill in actual details? I'm sorry, I can't resist. Let's fill in some proper details for this film, and as quickly as I possibly can, we can fill in all these controls. Don't forget to add some genres to this as well, otherwise we'll get some validation errors. I'm going to call it a romance film then, not quite. Select the picture, and then the trailer. So let's make sure I've got the trailer URL copied properly, and then paste it in with all the default options set, update the trailer. There we go, and if I click the Add to List button, I ought to find that all that gets added in properly to the list. If I just click OK, then head back to the sheet 1 properly, and then click on the hyperlink just to make sure the hyperlink actually works. And I'll always get this little warning about potential security issues. So if I just click OK, and that will then take me away to YouTube and take me to the appropriate video. So there we go. There's our little video all about putting videos in Excel VBA forms. Hope you've enjoyed that one. Join us for the next one. If you like what you've seen here, why not head over to the WiseL website, where you can find loads more free resources, including these videos, some written blogs and tutorials, and even some exercises that you can download to practice your skills. Thanks for watching. See you next time.